Good day to each and everyone, especially to my respected professor, Dr. Vintayan. And today, I will talk about the topic Designing Learning Activities and Instructional Systems, Part 1. I will just be tackling about Part 1 because my partner, Miss Venus Eraskin, will talk about the Part 2 of this said topic. Let's start. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Woodward Villalino Jr., one of the students of Educational Innovations and Technology System. And my professor is Dr. Randy Joy M. Vintayan, my Educational Innovations and Technology professor. So the expected outcome for this topic is we'll be able to identify and describe the learning activity design, to classify the Bloom's taxonomy, and to identify and describe the different cognitive load theory. Okay, so the coverage that I will be talking about will be divided into three topics. We have the first, the learning activity design. Number two, we have the Bloom's taxonomy. The third, which is the cognitive load theory. So the chapter 8 is designing learning activities in instructional system. So the part 1 of this chapter would focus on the following. So planning and implementing learning activities in accordance with the 1956 Bloom's revised taxonomy, and also with Anderson, the author of the revised taxonomy of 2001. So this will also be in accordance to the Sweller's 1988 cognitive load theory. And we will be able to develop basic skills for reader to design learning activities. Okay, so let's start with the learning activity design. Learning activity is a particular kind of human activity whose primary objective is the development of the following. Number one, knowledge. It is very important and is basic that everyone should have the knowledge, that in learning that we will be able to have and gain learn knowledge. We have number two, which is the skills. With knowledge, we'll be able to have and apply this into become our, and it will become our skills and eventually become our competencies, and we will become competent enough. So, learning activity produced by the society in the process of history through special learning actions taken upon learning objects consistent with their substance and structure. That is according to David Dove in 1988 and Hedegaard and Lomscher in 1999 rather. So again, so learning activity produced by the society. It is in the process of the history through special learning actions taken upon learning objects consistent with their substance and structure. So again, it will be produced by the society. So it changed eventually, but it really started long time ago until now. This learning activity is very important. Learning activity as well as an interaction between a learner and an environment, that is according to Betham in 2004. So interaction between a learner and environments. Environments would pertain to optionally be involving other learners as well. Could be the practitioners, could be the resources, the tools, and the services. So in this interaction between a learner and environment, it will be able to achieve a planned learning outcome. That is most important thing, that we are going to achieve a learning outcome. Learning without an outcome is nothing. So it's very important that we will be able to identify and to achieve a planned learning outcome. So the specific interactions of learners with other people using specific tools and resources oriented towards specific outcomes. So we'll be able to orient it toward a very specific outcome. Okay. And again, interaction of learners toward other people's using a specific tools. So very important that there are specific tools that we are going to use and some resources so we'll be able to encourage learning. So learning activity is really important in the learning activity design. Moving on, to get students to engage in learning activities, the teacher's essential task is this one: to get the students to engage in learning activities that are likely to result in achieving outcomes, according to Schwell in 1986. Again, the teacher's essential task is to what? To get students to engage in learning activities. As we've seen in the picture, there's engagement in the particular activity that they are having. So what the student does are more important than what the teacher does. So the teachers would only be the one who would motivate, but what the students are doing are the most important. It is more important than what the teachers are doing. So each learning activities in should be intentional. It should not be forced. It should be meaningful so that they could be able, it will be uh, easily remembered by the students and the learners, and it should be useful because learning should be applied in our daily life, should be applied in in a real life situation, so it should be useful as well. So these are important things that we should always remember. So learning activities according to teacher's perspective. So this is according to the perspective of the one doing the design, doing the teacher's or the teacher's perspective, as I've said a while ago. So we have here complete learning activity consists of the following components. So here are the components of the complete learning activity. Number one, learning objectives. So it's important that we have the objectives so that it will lead us and would align. This would be the start of aligning them into our particular task and our design as a whole. So we have number two, activities or tasks. Number three, we have the learning methods and operational procedures. We have number four, organizational forms. Number five, ways of interaction. How do we need to interact during the task that we are going to implement to them? Number six, forms of learning outcomes. So there are different forms of learning outcomes, and we need to identify them. Number seven, formative feedbacks. So important that we get feedbacks. Okay. Number eight, roles and responsibilities. So in every activities, there are particular roles and responsibilities that should take place. It could either be in the part of the teacher or the part of the learners, but it should be identified as well. Okay. Number four, we have the learning evaluation rules. So we need to set rules on how do we evaluate the learning, and this includes the evaluation criteria as well. Okay. So learning activities should include three essential elements. So these are the only three essential elements that we must consider. This is according to Wang, Kinshuk, and Spector in 2013. Number one, we have the learning tasks. Number two, we have the learning methods. So it's important that when we have a task, we'll be able to have the method and we'll be able to have the evaluation requirements. So we're able to test or evaluate if the methods that has been done and the tasks that has been given are effective enough. Okay. So moving on. So this is according to the learner's perspective as well. We've done with the teacher's perspective and now in the learner's perspective. Each learning activity includes four aspects. We have number one, we have the learning task, we have the learning resources, we have the evaluation methods, and learning supportive services. Okay. So, number one, learning task. Require a clear description of the learning outcome so that the learners can explicitly understand what they should do in the associated activity. Okay? It would require a clear description, how you would describe it, of the learning outcomes so that the learners can explicitly understand what they should do in the associated activity. So the activities given to them, the most important thing is that the learners do understand. So, what is the activity given if the students in the first place would not understand it? Okay. So, number two, we have the learning resources. Okay, from the word resources, include both non-digital or digital materials, providing the learners with the necessary information and content. So, the keywords here, necessary information and content, could be non-digital or digital materials. So, these are the learning resources that we should focus as well in conducting learning activity design. So example includes the textbooks, which is vital in all schools. So in the perspective of learners, these are very important resources that we should have. We have the study guides, we have the journal articles and reading packets, we have the video clips, and the online resources. So the learning resources as well, or the basic principle of preparing learning resources, is that they should be adequate and appropriate to complete the learning task, with the result of reducing redundant resources. It is important that we are going to reduce or totally not do the redundant resources. So why we must try to evaluate every now and then if our resources are not repeating. Okay. So number three, we have the evaluation methods. So it is the method of evaluation. So it should adequately examine the completion of learning activities without focusing on the assessment of learners' memorization of the learning contents. Okay. Examine the completion of learning activities. So not just that the learners just memorize what they have learned, but it is the total completion of the learning activities. Okay. So we need to assess. Number four, we have the learning support services. From the word support, it's extremely important. It's very important. So therefore, the instructors or tutors have to understand the learning difficulties and learning environments of the learners. So learning difficulties. So what made the learning difficult? What made the learning what are the obstacles that the learners are facing? So we need to understand the learning difficulties and the learning environment. So the environment, which includes the other learners as well. The environment could include about the place where they're learning. Could this be online, or could this be face to face? So as to facilitate an effective communication with them. So again, very important that in the learning support services under learning activity, that there is a to facilitate that we are going to facilitate a very effective communication with them. So if there is a obstacle or there is a barrier, so there will not be effective communication at all. So with good communication comes good learning as well. Okay. So moving on. So here are some other important reminders that we must place in mind. There should not be too many learning activities in a unit of instruction so as to minimize the extraneous cognitive burden placed on the learners. So cognitive, so the way of thinking, the way they think, and it will be exacerbating, it will be tiring for them. So there should not be too many learning activities in units of instruction. So we may um, enhance, or we may revise some particular designs or particular activity that we are planning, so that it will not make the students tired. Number two, important reminder that the critical points of learning activity designs are as follows. We have the learning objectives. We have the students' acceptance of the activity, considering their cognitive load, how much they are learning in a particular time. So we must need to identify if the students' acceptance to the activity is there. So are they receptive to it, or are they resistant? So that we could proceed to the next plan or to the other plan that you have prepared, so that it will be more effective towards them in favor of our learners. So as I've said on the other slides, what the student does are more important what the teachers are doing. So number three, we have that the various resources provided for the activity. So I've said a while ago, resources should be planned properly and not be redundant. So learning objective is the starting point and also the destination of learning activity design. So as we are tackling about learning activity design, we must put in mind that the learning objective is the starting point. It is where we start. It is where we make our stand, our goal. And it is also the destination of learning activity design. This is what leads us to our goal. While learner characteristics and resource conditions are constraints. So it would stop us from reaching our learning objectives. What are these? These are the learner characteristics and resource conditions. So what is the condition of our resources? Is it good? Is it enough? Is it effective? Is it redundant? So the learner's characteristics, are they receptive to it? Do they accept the activity? So these are the ones that would constrain us from reaching our objectives when it would not be effective. So it is important that we also learn how to evaluate. And the last one, important reminder, is that To design learning activities better, we need to focus on some of the theories related to these points. So here are the theories that we are going to tackle in the um, next slides. So first, we have the Bloom's taxonomy. We have the Sweller's cognitive load theory. And the other one will be discussed in the part two by my partner, the Mayer's principles of multimedia learning. So now we've come to the next topic, which is the Bloom's taxonomy. The primary purpose of learning objective analysis is to find out what learning outcome the learners can obtain after learning a specific part of the content, such as the knowledge, the skills, and so on. There are many ways to characterize learning objectives, and it requires a target classification framework to interpret systematically. And one of these includes the Bloom's taxonomy. It is a familiar classic classification framework for analyzing the learning objectives. So, this is a topic which is widely used by time today and even before by educators, and this is because of Benjamin S. Bloom. Benjamin S. Bloom uh, was born on February 21, 1913, and died on September 13, 1999. Was an American educational psychologist who made contributions to the classification of educational objectives and to the theory of mastery learning. He is particularly noted for leading educational psychologists to develop the comprehensive system of describing and assessing educational outcomes in the mid 1950s. He has influenced the practices and philosophies of educators around the world from the latter part of the 20th century, even now in the 21st century. So that is Benjamin Samuel Bloom. So moving on. So Benjamin S. Bloom, 1956, developed a hierarchy of educational objectives. If you say hierarchy, so it's like a ladder, okay? Which is referred to as the Bloom's taxonomy, which covers the learning objectives in three domains. So here are three domains that we are going to focus. First is we have the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. So basically speaking, cognitive domains includes the intellectual skills and the knowledge processing. Again, keywords here are the intellectual and the knowledge processing. Number two is the affective domain from the word affective. It represents the attitudes and the feelings. So represents objectives that are concerned with the attitudes and the feelings of our learners. And number three, we have the psychomotor domain from the word psychomotor or physical, concerns what the students might do physically. Okay, so now let's first talk about the cognitive domain. It includes 6 levels. We have the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. As we can see here in the pyramid, it has a hierarchy that we must consider. So starting from the knowledge, going to the evaluation. So this pyramid or model that I am showing you now is the old model that we are using according to Bloom. So the 6 levels are classified hierarchically for the simplest action to the high order thinking action. So simplest action to the high order thinking action. So the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy were arranged in a cumulative hierarchical framework that is achievement of complex skill or ability required achievements of the prior one. So before you proceed to the next one, it is according to Krathwold in 2002. Before you achieve the next skill, you need to achieve the prior one first. Okay, so that is clear. Okay, before we proceed to the affective domain, allow me to present to you different important aspects about the 6 levels. So first, we talk all about the knowledge, which is the considered as the most simplest action. Okay, simplest action. Okay, let's start. Knowledge deals primarily with the ability to memorize and recall specific facts. Again, memorize and recall a specific facts or information. So example is like the naming common varieties of apple or naming different varieties of animals. Okay, so this is basically knowledge. Number two is comprehension. It involves the ability to interpret and demonstrate students' basic understanding of ideas. Okay? To demonstrate to them to gain comprehension. So example is comparing the identifying characteristics of a golden delicious apple with a Granny Smith apple. So how will you identify the characteristics of the two? So that would lead to comprehension. That basically is the next action, which is comprehension. Okay. So next is we have the application. Okay. It involves the ability to apply concepts and principles to novel practical situations. Okay. So apply concepts from the word application, from the root word apply. So we're going to apply concepts and principles to a practical situation. Just for example, so would apples prevent scurvy, a disease caused by deficiency in vitamin C? So that is just a starting question. But would apple really prevent scurvy? So we need to involve the particular ability to apply in a particular concept. Okay. So now analysis. Okay. Analysis involves the ability to analyze. So from the word analyze, concepts, and then separate concepts or principles into components. Okay. Example, we have list for ways of serving foods made with apples and explain which one have the highest health benefits. So we're going to analyze now which of those has the highest health benefits. So we're going to provide references to support your statement. So in analysis, it's important that it is based with facts and based from particular references to support the stand. So next stage, we have the synthesis. So we are going now to the high order thinking action already, starting from uh, the application, the analysis, synthesis, and eventually evaluation. So synthesis, it involves the ability to blend elements and parts to form a whole. So we are now trying to synthesize everything to form a whole. Okay, example is to convert an unhealthy recipe for an apple pie to a healthy recipe by replacing your choice of ingredients. So now we're going to make it into a whole. So by converting an unhealthy recipe of an apple pie and making it into a healthy recipe. So explain the health benefits of using the ingredients you choose versus the original ones. This also includes analysis, as we have said a while ago, that it should be achieved, the prior one should be achieved. So now in our analysis, we have tackled there in different references and to explain about the different ingredients and then different in to explain further and to compare and to analyze which is healthy and unhealthy. And during synthesis, now we are going to make a particular recipe to replace the unhealthy ones and to explain the health benefits of using the ingredients versus the original ones. So with the research that you have done in the analysis, you'll be able now to apply and to synthesize it in your recipe, comparing the healthy ones and the unhealthy, the original ones, which is considered unhealthy. So now we are now moving on to the evaluation. So evaluation involves the ability to make judgments of the value of a work. The keyword here is judgment. So how do you judge if it's effective or not, if it's good or not? Examples, which kinds of apples are best for baking a pie and why? So now we're going to evaluate basing from all the steps that you have done from from the knowledge going to the synthesis. So which kind of apples are best for baking a pie after all that has been done prior to the evaluation? So I hope you understood the different domains of the cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy. So now let's proceed now to the affective domain. It relates to the emotions, attitudes, appreciation, and values such as enjoying, conserving, respecting, and supporting. The affective domain is divided into 5 main subcategories according to Spectre in 2015. So, so the 5 main subcategories are receiving, responding, valuing, organization, and characterization. So, receiving, students pay attention passively, and it is about the student's memory and recognition as well. So receiving is about how the students recognize it, how the students memorize it. So without receiving, there is no learning at all. There will be no learning that will occur. So it is important that there is a particular receiving, the attitude or the emotion or the appreciation or the value of receiving, so that we'll be able to start learning. So how would the students recognize this? Okay, number 2, responding. Students participate learning process activity. They not only attend to a stimulus but also reacts in sometimes and some way. So they react, they respond. So students' participation in learning process activity. So when you are having your learning activity, so in their participation, how do they react? How do they respond? So it is very important in this affective domain, in this subcategory. Okay. Number 3, we have the valuing. Students attach and associate a value or some values to an object. Okay. They associate a value to an object that they are learning, to a phenomenon, to a piece of information that they have learned from you. So, and even the knowledge that they acquired. So, valuing is basically the values that is attached and associated by the students. So, how do they associate the learning? Okay, that is valuing. Number 4 is organization. So, students can put different values, information, ideas, and accommodate them within their schema together. Okay, they compare, they relate, and elaborate on what has been learned. So basically, organization is how students compare, relate, and elaborate on their learning and how they organize thoughts. And lastly, number 5 is the characterization. Students can build abstract knowledge. So let's remember that in affective domain, characterization happens and they build abstract knowledge. So let's proceed to the psychomotor domain of Bloom's taxonomy. Psychomotor, it concerns things students might physically do. So what does students might physically do? One popular version of the taxonomy of psychomotor domain belongs to Dave in 1970, who presents the 5 levels of the psychomotor domain as the following. So there are different versions, but we are going to focus on the famous one from Dave in 1970. We have the imitation, manipulation, precision, articulation, and naturalization. Okay. So here are the a table. Here is a table by Dave to clearly compare and differentiate the difference between the different categories. And here are some example and keywords that we must put into our heart, not just in our minds. So first is imitation, observing and patterning, making a pattern behavior after someone else. So it is like how we imitate our parents. So patterning behavior after someone else's. Okay, example, copying a work of art, performing a skill while observing a demonstrator. So basically, learners just copy from the teachers, from the work of art that they are representing, and we tell them, okay, students, please follow this one and please copy this one, and they will just mimic. They're just going to copy, follow, repeat, replicate, or reproduce, or even trace. Even in the kindergarten, tracing activity is very important. So imitation is all about this one. Copy, follow, mimic, repeat, replicate, reproduce, and trace. Okay. First is we have the psychomotor domain of manipulation. So being able to perform certain actions by memory or following instructions. So how do they manipulate the activity? So being able to perform a skill on one's own after taking lessons or reading about it follows instruction to build a model. So how do they able to perform the skill after taking the lessons? After the teacher said so, how would they do it? How would they follow instructions? How would they act? How would they build? How would they execute? How would they perform? Those are the keywords which shows the category of manipulation. How do they manipulate the lesson that has been given? To act, how do they build? How do they execute it? Okay. Now we are moving on to the category of precision. It is refining, becoming more exact, performing a skill within a high degree of precision. So working and reworking something so that it will be just right, perform a skill or task without assistance. So in this stage, there is no assistance because they are refining what has been done already or about to start, making sure that it is a high degree of precision. So it demonstrates a task to a beginner. It is showing also like an example how to demonstrate a particular task to a beginner. So they are going to calibrate. How would you demonstrate it? How would you master or perfection it? Okay? So it is important that it is precise. It is precisely done, especially in the laboratories, for example. So the task that should be made, the experiments that should be made should be in precision. Okay. Now we have the articulation. Articulation is the coordinating and adapting a series of actions to achieve harmony and internal consistency. It is important that there is harmony and consistency internally. So combining a series of skills to produce a video that involves music, drama, color, sound, etc. Combining a series of skills activities to meet a novel requirement. So making a novel would just not just involve one skill, but different skills, series of skills to produce a particular video. So here we would be able to identify the keywords such as the adapt. Where did they adapt this? How do they construct? How do they combine ideas together? How do they create it? Or even customize it according to their creativity? How do they modify it from the original? Or how do they formulate? Okay, so that is articulation, coordinating and adapting a series of actions. So not just one, but series of action to come up with a particular requirement. Okay, now proceeding to the next category, which is naturalization, mastering a high level performance until it becomes second nature or natural. So it's important that you are mastering it until it will become natural to them. It will become a skill to them without needing to think much about it anymore. Example, we have maneuvers a car into a tight parallel parking spot. So in maneuvering a car, at first you're going to master it so that the car won't be hit. But eventually it will become natural to you already. So another example, operates a computer quickly and accurately. So at start, we don't know where to press, what to press, but eventually when you master a high level performance, you'll be able to become natural in typing already. So displays competence while playing the piano. Okay? So piano, you started from one level to another, from grade to another, and then eventually become natural. Even Michael Jordan plays basketball, or how Nancy Lopez hitting a golf ball. They started from mastering it and then become natural. So the keyword to consider here is still create. How do they create this to become natural? How do they design this? How do they develop or invent or manage or naturally did it? Okay? So these are the keywords that would identify the naturalization uh, of a particular domain in psychomotor. Okay? So I hope you get knowledge from this by just hitting the keywords of that are stated here in the table. Okay, so now let's proceed to the next one. So I would like to show you the old version and the new version. So the knowledge is just basically memorizing or remembering. We have the comprehension. Comprehension, it means understanding the facts. Application, or the applying. Analysis, or the analyzing. In the old version, synthesis comes first before evaluation, but in the new version, it is flipped or uh, interchange. So evaluating comes first before they would come up with the creating. Okay, so this is the new version of the Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so it's here. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And to further understand the Bloom's taxonomy, please watch this video.
Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education, Bloom's Taxonomy, explained for classroom educators. Now, before we begin, let's give some credit to Benjamin Bloom, who created the taxonomy. And this taxonomy was later revised by Lauren Anderson. Now, here's the question posed. Why should educators use Bloom's taxonomy? Well, Bloom's taxonomy helps educators develop critical thinking skills and higher order cognitive abilities in their students. The best education is one where students are challenged. Next, what purpose does Bloom's taxonomy serve for educators? To provide a framework or organization for classifying lesson objectives, teachers can build their lessons through Bloom's taxonomy, for example. Now, let's specifically see how we can use Bloom's taxonomy. The first thing you want to do is consider the level of your students and the course level. A lesson for an algebra special education class will be different from an algebra advanced placement class. Aim to reach objectives for analyzing for remedial classes and evaluation for advanced placement classes. So, what are the levels of Bloom's taxonomy? The lowest level of cognitive rigor requires students to remember, apply, followed by analyze, followed by evaluate, and lastly, create, the highest level of cognitive rigor. Now, remember was first known as knowledge, but later revised. Similarly, understand was previously called comprehension. And lastly, the order of create and evaluate were switched. Bloom's taxonomy is actually a hierarchy, where students must first master the lower levels before mastering the higher levels. The lower levels are relatively simple levels, while the higher levels represent more complex cognitive rigor. The higher levels are more abstract as well. When utilizing Bloom's taxonomy as educators, descriptive verbs have been made available to help educators plan lessons. Verb tables have been created to align with levels of Bloom's. Arrange, describe, order, name, memorize. Those particular verbs are used to set objectives for remember level, explain, summarize, paraphrase, infer, discuss, are all aligned with understanding. Break down, calculate, model, subdivide, infer are all aligned with analyze. Critique and judge are aligned with the evaluation level. And lastly, generate, plan, and produce are aligned to the top levels of cognition, which is create. Now, to summarize what we have learned thus far, to develop critical thinking in students, educators use Bloom's descriptive verbs to write lesson objectives, which are aligned to different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So thank you for watching this video.
So there you have it about the Bloom's taxonomy. It's so clear from the video of how it was revised and how important these keywords are used in achieving particular objectives. So, so now let's proceed to the next topic, which is the cognitive load theory. Please watch this video.
Imagine that you're a student. It's Friday and school is out in just a few short hours. The weather is perfect and you can't wait to get outside. Oh no, did you just lose your pencil? Nope, found it. Your teacher is writing something you've never seen before on the smartboard. Is this a new lesson? You're not sure what those little numbers mean, and you're already a bit distracted, so by the time class ends, you feel a little fuzzy. Your brain has had a lot to process, and although you don't realize it, your working memory is at capacity. Prominent educational psychologist Dr. John Sweller helped demonstrate that working memory, the cognitive powerhouse dedicated to rapid perceptual and linguistic processing, has a limited capacity. After initial processing, all incoming information is either discarded or begins its journey to long-term memory. The cognitive load theory that emerged from Sweller's research provides us with insight into how we can improve learning outcomes. To understand how this applies in the classroom, let's break it down. As you were sitting in class, your working memory was bombarded by this new information, along with millions of bits of distracting stimuli taken in through your senses. It can be very easy for working memory to be overwhelmed, but your brain has a clever strategy to address this. It sorts new information into schemas or categories based on what you already know. When incoming data doesn't fit nicely into pre-existing schemas, your brain quickly adapts those schemas or develops new ones. According to cognitive load theory, this process is both active and fluid and can be enhanced with the right supports. So what if we could start over and strategically introduce exponents in a way that would create vital connections with other more established schemas, like your strong foundational knowledge of multiplication and addition? We could then pair those connections with proven methodology, such as strategic practice and scaffolded feedback, to transform a challenging task from a potential source of frustration into a powerful aha moment that will be remembered. The more we study the science of learning, the more we can utilize research to develop better instructional materials and methods based on how the brain works. Informed by concepts like cognitive load theory, learning science empowers us to work with talented teachers to strategically design instruction in a way that capitalizes on cognitive functions. As educators and learning scientists, we can help the brain work smarter, not harder, and empower all students to unlock their full potential.
There you have it about cognitive load theory. So it is important that we work smarter. Okay? We teach smarter so that they will be able to gain a more effective way of teaching or way of facilitating our learning to our students. So cognitive load theory is created for letting learners get informations and learning content efficient. It is an instructional theory based on the field's knowledge of human cognitive architecture and can be used to recommend in instructional procedures. So if we be able to make a particular cognitive architecture about it, we'll be able to recommend this to the other instructors or other educators as well, that it would be more effective if you use this or that. So cognitive load theory builds upon the human information processing model and places its primary emphasis on relations between working memory and long-term memory. As we've seen in the video, there's a working memory, and when it's full already, it may be forgotten or may be placed in the long-term memory. So this is during the 1980s and 1990s um, definition of the cognitive load learning. So it was developed out of the study of problem solving by John Sweller. in the late 1980s. So, which differentiates cognitive load into three types. So, here are the three types of cognitive load. We have the first, which is intrinsic, number two, extraneous, and number three, germane. Okay, so now let's start with the first one, which is intrinsic. Intrins- Intrinsic cognitive load is the inherent level of difficulty associated with a specific instructional topic that cannot be altered due to the nature of the material. So again, it cannot be altered due to the nature of the material given. So that is according to Sweller in 1988. So intrinsic, it is the inherent level of difficulty that associated with a specific instructional topic. So it is in there already, it's given. However, it needs to be considered in activity design so that knowledge can be communicated at the right grain size. So it is very important that we consider the intrinsic cognitive load because even as natural as it is, what we need to consider of how hard would it be so that we could communicate it to the learners in a right grain size or in a particular in a proper technique or in a proper approach that we are going to give to our learners. Okay, so now we have the extraneous cognitive load. Extraneous cognitive load is generated by information presented to learners and is under the control of learning activity designers. So again, it is, according to Chandler and Sweller in 1991, wherein it emphasizes that it can be controlled by the designer's learning activity. Okay? So how would they do it? So it's the extraneous cognitive load. Unlike intrinsic, it's naturally there. It's given that it is like this. It should be learned this way. It is the, no, I mean like, it is given that it's the particular knowledge that it should be learned, but extraneous is how you would present it. Okay? So it can be attributed to the design of the learning materials, and it can be and should be altered. Okay, so this time could be altered. It can be attributed to the design of the learning materials, and it can and should be altered. Okay, unnecessary information within the text or format may cause an overload in the working memory, so and will affect the learner's storage of information negatively. So they might forget it, and that's the worst thing that will happen. They will forget what they have learned. Good thing if it will be placed in the long-term memory. So you need to alter it if it's not effective. So unnecessary information within the text or format may cause an overload. So it should be given in a very precise way, or it should be given in a way or a technique that is easy to remember. Multiple sources of information, unnecessary and comprehensive format, extra sounds, and long complex explanations are examples of an extraneous cognitive load. So this is an extraneous cognitive load that should be altered. Okay, so it is in the control of the learner's activity designers. Okay, so it's up to them. How would they stop that these multiple sources of information, this unnecessary comprehensive format, these extra sounds and long complex explanations would be able to be altered for a more effective learning approach. Okay, that is extraneous cognitive load. Now we will proceed to the germane cognitive load. It is devoted to the processing, construction, and automation of schemas. So we would like to be reminded that schemas are representation of a plan or a theory in the form of an outline or a model. So the germane cognitive load is devoted to the processing, construction, and automation of the schemas. So it is extra information that can be altered. So this also could be altered. This is an extra information, just like the extraneous cognitive load, which will also be altered, and like the intrinsic one that could not be, again, intrinsic, cannot be altered. We have the extraneous that can be and should be altered. And we have here the extra information, which is could be altered as well. So as intrinsic cognitive load is thought to be permanent, it is suggested that the learning designers should limit extraneous load and must promote germane load. Okay, so this load, cognitive load, should be promoted. However, germane cognitive load should be used for necessary schematic construction. So there should be a proper and necessary schematic construction before it would be used more effectively, in fact. So just to sum up all of this, so let's say, for example, that in the stage of a junior high school, the law of inertia is a crucial topic in relevant curriculum. It is hard for students to differentiate the concepts that objects possess natural properties of uniform linear motion and stationary state from the concept of features that objects have in the inertia. So this topic talks about inertia. As we can see in this scenario, that the intrinsic cognitive load, or the permanent one there, is the law of inertia. This is the knowledge that has been discussed by the Newton's first law, which is the law of inertia. So this is permanent. We cannot change this. We cannot alter this. And we could identify that the extraneous cognitive load here is suitable activity design or the learning method. So what are the suitable activity design or learning method that must be done? So this thing could be altered and should be altered so that it will not be too much for the students or the learners to accept. So the third one, we identify the germane cognitive load. So the germane cognitive load here is we're going to review the relevant laws or to provide the different examples of Newton's first law. So review the relevant laws, or we're going to provide different examples. So this is how we are going to show them the extra information on review, but through reviewing, it could be altered as well. Okay, so this should be promoted properly through having a necessary schematic construction, a good plan, a good representation of a plan or a model of or an outline. Okay, so that it would be accepted by the learners as an information which is useful to them and could possibly go to their long-term memory and not just be a waste of learning. Okay, so talking about the design strategy, as this is the main focus of this topic, so how do we design our strategies? So first is the design physical and animation experiment presentation to reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. So we are going to reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. So again, we're going to design a physical and animation experiment presentation. So using technical skills in this, we're going to present to them animation experiment presentation so that we'll be able to reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. So why we should reduce it, so that it will not be too much for them, but we cannot alter this because it is given, it is permanent, that the law of inertia should be discussed this way, that this is the law of inertia in the first place. So we must reduce the load, cognitive load, through having this kind of activities or strategy, which is making the design, which is like the animation as well. Okay, then now we are going to design a learning activity that helps recall the simple phenomenon of daily life. So it is important that we incorporate this with our daily life situations. This is the same with the 21st century learning approach, wherein we are going to uh, just going to encourage our students to do so, and we are going to like the captain of the ship here, and let them do what it should be done, and by giving instructions, and then relate this into a real life situation. That's also a very important thing that would help them to recall this simple phenomenon. So which resulted from the inertia. Okay, so we are going to ask the students or the learners to recall a very simple daily life situation that would incorporate the law of inertia. So just for example, when the car starts or brakes, suddenly passengers will be tilted backward or forward. So this is just showing them an example of how they could recall and could possibly keep make the learning and reduce the loads, the cognitive loads that they are having. So by learning more of this and identifying the different cognitive loads, we'll be able to give them a more effective learning because we have lessened the loads that they are going to intake and only remember those important things and would be able to effectively apply this through the next information that they will be having. So from one concept to another, it's very important that we'll be able to have this learning be associated together and not just learn then forget. Okay, that's the most important thing as instructors, as uh, learning activity designers, that through our design, through the learning activities that we're giving to them, they would be able to effectively comprehend, understand, and put in mind and inculcate this through their minds. So these are all the topics of the part one, and the part two will be discussed further by Mom Venus Eraskin, and she will tackle about Mayer's principles of the multimedia learning. These things that I have discussed a while ago are all correlated to the Mayer's principles of multimedia learning. This, all the theories that we have learned, all the taxonomies that we have learned, this would all lead to a proper and a very effective activity design, which is by through the help of Mayer's principles of multimedia learning. So through multimedia, it will help lessen the cognitive loads that we also have learned a while ago. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learned something from me, and I hope you will learn more as Mom Venus Erskine will discuss more about the multimedia learning. Thank you very much for listening and have a pleasant day to all of you. God bless.